What's up, YouTube? This is Kian Sobani. Today's clip is a longer one, mostly because I really didn't know how to narrow it down. I had so much fun on the podcast last night with Matt and Owen. We had so many fun conversations and some deep analysis. And what I ended up clipping for YouTube today, this podcast, by the way, went up for free last night. So if you wanted it timely on your commute, you should have been subscribed to the podcast. Search Manage Madrid in your podcast app. We're on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Just check your podcast app. That went up last night. What I clipped for today on YouTube is a conversation about the Vinicius Benzema connection, Vinicius' performance as a whole against Elche. What is the best option between Luka Jovic versus someone like Hazard or Isco as a false nine? Or are there other options? Jovic's performance against Elche off the bench, Ferland Mendy's performance, our defense on both the goals, Militao's performance. So I went pretty lengthy for this clip. Usually I cut them a little bit shorter, but really enjoyed it. And again, if you want the whole episode, it's linked in the show notes if you want to just click on it directly, but also just search Manage Madrid on your podcast app. And also, thank you, Miami. It was so much fun. You guys came out. We had a really fun conversation with Andres Cordero, whom I'm sure you guys all know, does terrific work now with CBS Paramount, does Serie A coverage, commentary. He used to be the commentator for beIN Sports, as well as so many La Liga games alongside Ray Hudson, and it was a pleasure having him in Miami. So thank you for coming out, Miami. If you guys like these podcasts and you're in these following cities in the next few months, London in the UK, we got Washington, and then we got Chicago and Mumbai. Those are the 4 cities left on the Manage Madrid Podcast World Tour. Just leave a comment and tell me which one you want to sign up for. And the Washington podcast, which is in March, there's only like a week left to book your early bird spot. So if you don't book by the end of this month, the tickets go up in price. So book ASAP if you're in DC area and you would like to see us, because you can get it at a cheap price if you book this week. Without further ado, here is today's lengthy clip. Thanks for subscribing and enjoy.
But I think that one Vinicius chance, I think it was the first one where he dribbled. It initially came with a really nice combination between him and Benzema to release him into the box, which maybe we can talk a little bit about that connection and how good it's been this season, but I don't know necessarily how much you guys have to say about that. But he finds himself there, and as usual, he's played into an angle towards the end line where most players, that's it, that's the end for them, right? They just have to release the ball and see what happens. But for Vinicius, that's a good position because it's 1 versus 1, and the fact that it's in a tight space doesn't matter. The defender's dangerously positioned because if they fly in with a tackle, Vinicius is going to move the ball away and they're going to foul him. So somehow he ends up having the advantage there, and he just drives out of those positions one way or the other to work something onto goal or work a pass. And this time he goes end line and then cuts all the way inside and he puts a shot on goal that the goalkeeper smothers. I think XG is a bit blind to the context here, which obviously it is in any isolated shot, because I just don't really see a way Vinicius works that in. That's not to say that wasn't a good moment. What needed to happen was Vinicius needed to pass that 2 dribbles earlier. Think he made a mistake going all the way inside to shoot that on goal. And that happens, right? It happened in split seconds, but Vinicius' decision-making has been so good this season. It was a surprise to me that he just didn't release the pass, because I think that was the more likely path to goal. That was the one moment that really stuck out to me in terms of before the shot, we really should have done something better. Otherwise, it was mostly finishing. But yeah, so there was Lucas, who was a huge source of offense, but otherwise a lot of it was Vinicius Benzema combinations to some. I don't know how they do it. I'm going to have to go back and just look at every single one and break it down at some point, because it's always in the tightest of spaces with the defense all over them. And there's first the accuracy of those short combinations, but then just the chemistry they have to react off of each other in the best way possible and somehow pick out not only a dangerous space, but one that's possible for the next pass is just I don't really believe in this line, but if you were, it was it's one of those things you don't teach, that kind of cliche. That's almost what it kind of feels like, because that's just it. That's how quickly it happens. That's how organically it happens. And it honestly reminds me a little bit of like MSN, Messi, Neymar, Suarez in that time where Neymar, Messi would have those types of combinations to enter the box. And there was just like no other attack could do this versus deep blocks. That was, I think, really on show today. And I actually think that influenced the substitutions that we saw in keeping Hazard on. And again, we'll get to that. But yeah, that was one of our primary ways of working our way inside the block to define angles and creative ways to get shots off. And really the entire season, that's been our like one creative, spontaneous way of trying to attack deep blocks. And obviously all of these didn't come from these combinations, but I just went and counted on who scored at the end of the game because I was looking at Vinny's stats. Just a rough count. I mean, there were a lot of touches on the edge of the box, but in total, he had 14 touches inside the box, which just, it outstripped everyone by like 3 times. And yeah, I mean, his ability alongside Benzema to be able to work our way into the penalty box and get touches in the most valuable area on a football pitch is quite remarkable. And I think there were a number of occasions where you could say, that was happening in the first half as a direct result of those two.
I will say this, though. I think, yes, he had 14 touches in the box, and that's always a good sign. It's, I mean, you're in dangerous areas, but I actually think there were more than one occasion, including the sequence you mentioned, where he basically dribbled into Edgar Badia's hands. But there's more than one occasion where I felt like he should have been quicker just to take the shot. I think there was one play where he decided to cut in and dribble, and he just missed with a curled in shot. He was like just outside the 6.
That was the other big chance he missed.
That was his other big chance, and I felt like he should have just taken that first time, or rather than trying to cut in and get a better angle, just take that first time. And there were a couple moments, like not just him, but I felt like a lot of players today were just trying to dribble too much inside the box. And whenever you take more time inside the box or in and around the box, it gives defenders are going to be all over you. It gives defenders time to close down. And I just felt like that was one item I would nitpick today. And on that play, on that sequence you mentioned where Vinicius dribbled into Edgar Badia, could you argue that Lucas Vazquez probably his run, like he should have just held rather than make a run to Vinicius, because he actually brought the defender over and closed Vinicius' space down. And so I felt like Lucas, if he had just held his position or maybe curled his run a little bit towards the back post, it would have given Vinicius more space to either take the shot himself or pass it to Vazquez.
Agree. Completely agree. When I saw that, I thought Vazquez took himself away as an outlet and basically killed the goal-scoring opportunity. Obviously, it was still a goal-scoring opportunity, but like to me, like those 2 Vinicius chances you guys are talking about right now, I thought they were more difficult than people made them out to be. And this is where we can talk about XG inflation and not having the context of, being able to watch the game. XG is once the next evolution of XG is becoming a robot that can start taking like calculated decisions but based on watching the game, but rather than areas on the pitch and shot location. But I think the one where he dribbles in the 6-yard box, and it's just such a tight angle. Like I don't like. Sometimes maybe you can make the keeper from there. It's going to be hard to go to the near post or far post given the angle. And there was if Vazquez had just stayed put there, he would have gotten an open net basically. So that was on Vazquez. I think Vinicius did his job. And the other one, I think taking that first time would have been difficult too. Instead of taking the extra touch and shooting just wide of the far post. I mean, it wasn't that far away from scoring. And I've watched that one a couple times. I think it's hard to find an angle to shoot that first time without the shot getting blocked. But maybe I don't know. Again, this is I think it's hard for me to kind of nitpick some of these shooting things today because I think we had to deal with so many bodies in the box that every time we got in there, we had to almost take an extra touch to go past a man or something, and then in maybe some outlier possessions where we could have pulled a quicker trigger, maybe it was just ingrained in us in this game that it's going to be hard. We need to carve out space. So sometimes sometimes it's just kind of hard to decide these things on the fly. With Vinicius though, and you mentioned the Benzema Vinicius connection, I've started to like feel this way now about Vinicius and Benzema for quite some time. But Benzema, obviously, maybe a longer sample size. But Vinicius, especially like the last few games, I kind of felt this way. I felt this way about Ronaldo and Messi. So this is a huge compliment to what I'm saying about Vinicius now. When I watch Ronaldo and Messi regularly, and I haven't watched Ronaldo regularly or analyzed him really since he left our club. Messi, I would still watch a lot of Barcelona and take notes on him. But I used to like almost like just be done with taking notes on those two when I watch them regularly, because like what else is there to say? They, you understand what they do. You understand their player profile. They're just so unbelievably consistent that like what are you going to do? Just take the same note like 90 times a game for a whole season? You kind of know how great they are, and then you just become desensitized to it, and then you almost stop appreciating it. I'm starting to get there with Vinicius, where like I could just fill up a whole note document on his performance today, even though he didn't score. But like, what's the point? You just kind of tip your hat and be like, okay, this guy's really good. What am I really analyzing here? He does things that you can't teach. He breaks lines constantly. Some of his first touches passes, man, were incredible. Just like little shoulder drops. He is so confident. And even like the assist to Militao at the end, it's just so casual. He just like at will just dribbles past his man and puts a nice cross in. There was a lot of like moments in this game where you just think he would be tired because they've been relentlessly attacking for 90 minutes and you think he'd just get gas at some point. But unlike the other game, I think it was 2 games ago, right? It was against Athletic, where Ancelotti literally said Vinicius was more tired than Rodrigo. Unlike that one, I thought this one, like he was just relentless until the end and was just at will, just dribbling past players. And it's such an asset to have. The fact that we have to go next game without him and Benzema is going to be an interesting thing to navigate. Probably not very fun, but I'm kind of out of words for this guy. I thought despite not scoring, he's awesome, and I'm still not hard on his finishing. Like a lot of people are like, oh, last few games, Vinicius is back to being really good at everything except for scoring. I'm like, all right, relax. He's fine. Like this is just a couple games dip, and I don't think the chances he had today were that easy. Even if XG tells me that was like 0.58 in the 6-yard box, it was a good chance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he shouldn't have scored it, but I'm not that worried about that aspect of the game. But I am worried about like, I don't know what's going to happen. Especially if this Benzema injury is serious, which we hope not. But I don't know what's going to happen without him. Even the Vasquez thing on the right. Sorry, Matt. Even the Vasquez thing on the right, I thought he was like better today. But I don't know if I saw him as good as you guys saw him. But I still think we really need an attacking upgrade on the right that can be really reliable in that situation. Like there were a few times where Vasquez, I thought, like there was that one weird one where he should have crossed it, but then he does this weird back heel to Benzema in the second minute and it goes nowhere. I thought like even he was slower than Mojica, like on some of those 50-50 duels. He just doesn't have the physical, ability to outrun someone like that and get the ball first. I thought some of his passing into the box was poor, although he did have 3 key passes, I think, as Matt said, and some good cutbacks. Defensive reads were fine. Like I'm not that worried about him defensive, but like I just feel like we need someone way more reliable and consistent on the right. That's what we're missing.
So going back a little bit to that chance. So as I said, I think XG is a bit blind to the context of that Vinicius one where he cuts inside, takes the shot on goal, because the goalkeeper basically completely smothers it, which is why I think he should have made the pass. However, I think it's important that Matt brings up Lucas's run. I still think you play that pass. Like the window is still there. The problem is the window is not as big as it should be, because I don't know if it's necessarily even as much holding his run, because making that initial run to about the penalty spot or a little to the right of it drags the defender inside, and that's when you spring the other way to the far post, and Vinny just has to play the ball across, and it's a tap in, and it would have been super easy for him to make that adjustment and read in live time, because his body orientation is just, it's directly across where like that pass should be, right? It's like right there, 180 degrees. So I guess, okay, it wasn't necessarily the greatest read by Lucas there. That happens. I think this is more of like a micro point on the subtleties of box movement and how people just kind of take it for granted, right? Like the value of a tap in doesn't come from the finish, right? That's like always going to be like a zero point 0.9 XG, like, and people are like, what's so good about that? It's about getting into that position in the first place. And sometimes it really is as simple as just being there. But in a case like this, where you think that as Vinny is coming inside and there's only one defender all you have to do is just get to a position. It's not as simple like as that, right? A little bit of deception maybe is required to be able to shed that defender, or a little bit of on the fly, deeper thinking to understand that maybe going to the ball all the time when you're trying to get a chance isn't a good thing. Like, and those are more instinctual, right? It's not like Lucas Vazquez can just sit there and, you know, take out his notes and read them and figure out what he's supposed to do there. It's experience in those positions time and time again that the best goal scorers in the world have, that allow them to turn those moments into great passing opportunities for their teammates and goals. And yeah, I don't know, like Matt bringing that to my attention and like me looking that over again as he was saying it, like more and more, it just seems like one of those obvious moments where, for example, if Ronaldo was there, he's getting a tap in at the back post. And maybe if Benzema was in that position, that would be the case as well. I guess just an example where like there's a lot of subtleties to box movement that I think people miss. And this, I think, is one example of that.
Well, and I don't want to get too far ahead because I know we haven't even talked about the goals, but I think this is kind of a good progression. This is why I think you guys feel the same way. Like, this is why we rated Jovic before he came. This is what I write all those articles about. And like, when you watch him closely enough and he has enough game time, he is elite in terms of his movement off the ball. And he's one of those guys that recognizes those spaces, recognizes how to time runs, and recognizes where to orientate his body and where to be. And it's so difficult to do. Like you said, it's so underrated, and it's not the thing that catches your eye because usually most people are just watching the ball. And so today I thought that's not to say that I thought Jovic had a good performance today, because I didn't. I thought he was really poor. I thought this was a big opportunity for him. And
wait, hold on. I just need to make sure we're recording this. Hold on. Yeah, okay, we are. Whew. We got the Matt with taking out the big guns on his own son. Murder in broad daylight.
Ian has gotten so dramatic about criticism now. Like, I don't know what it is.
Well, and like, honestly, like, I know we're joking, but like, honestly, I've always been realistic with Jovic, and I've always said, like, I don't know that he'll succeed at Real Madrid just because I don't think he'll get the continuity that's required for him to kind of show his talent. I think his best chance was probably the period where after he scored against Real Sociedad and he played against Inter Milan, but Benzema came back from injury so quickly that he could never keep that positive momentum going. And then he picked up COVID again, and I think everybody forgets he just came back from a second bout with COVID, and so that may not necessarily be easy to come back from. But today, I just felt like he was really disconnected. I felt like some of his runs he didn't have as much intent or purpose behind some of his runs that he usually does, his off-ball runs. And I could see he's visibly frustrated by the fact that, like, a lot of when the ball was put into the box or something, it was played behind him rather than leading into him or in front of him. And so that's understandable. But I think we're at a point now with Benzema's injury, like, we have to see how long he's realistically out for. It seems like first reports here that it's not that bad, but let's say he is out for 3-4 games. I think Ancelotti has to decide one of two things. One, he either has to go all in on Jovic and give the guy the continuity and confidence he needs to show off his talent and be that guy that we saw glimpses of earlier this season in those two aforementioned games I talked about, or if he's just going to get these 10 minutes and, like, we sideline him and we go with Hazard and Isco over those games, that's fine. Like, I honestly think Isco deserves more minutes, and maybe Isco in a false nine could work while Benzema's out. But then you just have to accept the fact that it's not going to work out for Jovic, and we got to move. We might as well let him leave in January, because this if you're going to give a guy, like we saw it with Militao, if you're going to give a guy continuity, time, confidence, like, he can turn the narrative around and he can be the player you thought he was. Like, almost everybody thought Militao wasn't going to make it at Real Madrid and that he was going to be sold. And then a couple good months at the end of the season where he actually got consistent playing time and Zidane was forced to play him because of injuries, that's when we saw his talent. And so I don't think you can. Yes, Jovic was extremely poor today, and he's had games like this before, but I don't think you can kind of sideline a player completely and throw him out when you haven't really given him a true chance. And he's a type of striker that needs continuity and confidence.
It's a double-edged sword for me, like, to decide what to do with that position when Benzema's out. On one hand, I think I agree with you that Isco doesn't deserve to be cast away the way he has been this season. I think his limited minutes have been decent. If you go with a false nine like a Hazard and Isco, like, here's the thing. To me, with the issue with Jovic is involvement. 7 touches today. And this is pretty much the norm for him, where it's like, when Benzema's on the field, you just freaking know he's there. He's gonna... He has his stamps all over this game. He's tattooing his entire performance on the game. He's like shoving his performance down your throat. You know he's on the field. With Jovic, you just don't know. And I guess the thing is, like, if you go with a Isco or a Hazard false nine role, heck, even Rodrigo, like, however you want to split it, but probably one of those two for the aforementioned ones, then I think you get a baseline of, like, okay, you have your build-up sorted, because Benzema contributes a lot to the build-up and ball progression. You have that aspect of it. But you might lose, like, you know, we spent some time talking about the Vasquez decision to make the wrong run on the Vinicius chance. Jovic is there, you get that aspect of it. And so there's that. And also, like, this is kind of what we've been wanting Jovic to get a string of games as a starter, right? Like, we've been asking for this, because let's be honest, like, a lot of this it's really hard, man. It's really hard to establish yourself as a striker if you're not getting rhythm. And, like, as much as I can sit here and we can cry about it, he can cry about it, you know, he's not a victim. Like, he has to earn his right to play and continue to grow into the team. Life is not fair. He's a footballer making millions, you know. He's got to suck it up and give it his best shot. But he needs some rhythm. So if you can get a string of games going, can we see something? Can we see, like, a Nicolas Anelka case where you do nothing all season and you show up, like, when it matters and score 1 or 2 goals out of nowhere? I mean, he had a good game against Real Sociedad. That was a New York podcast we did. We got to talk about a fun Jovic game, which we said we wish you were here, Matt. But so I think you get, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. If you go with the Isco Hazard, you get the build-up and maybe not the finishing. If you get Jovic in there, maybe you don't get as much involvement in the build-up, but you have someone reliable, you know, with his off-ball movement in the box a little bit. But I do feel like the Isco Hazard false nine could at least raise your baseline a little bit. And they're, you know, if those two get chances in front of goal, they're not, you know, they're pretty decent finishers in those situations too. So I would probably lean towards the false nine, but I really, there's definitely a big part of me that would like to see Jovic get a string of chances here. The problem is, these are not like preseason friendlies that are coming up. These are, you know, we've lost a couple more points today in the league. Luckily, Sevilla dropped some points too, and the other two, Atletico and Barca, are so far away. I don't think it matters what they do. But we definitely don't want to lose any more ground on Sevilla, and then we got the Champions League coming up, which let's just, God forbid, we're missing Vinicius and Benzema for those ones. But, you know, for sure we're going to miss the Brazilians for the Athletic game unless it gets postponed in the Copa del Rey. What would you lean towards as like a Benzema substitute role?
I would probably just start Jovic. I mean, I don't
I love how I
necessarily
just like
have.
I like put my soul into like all the
Yeah, we both did.
intricacies of
He
like,
just goes with
okay,
that.
if you go with the false nine, this is what happens. We're doing that crazy guy with the science chart in the background. There's like maps and like diagrams and algorithms, and Ohm's just like, Jovic it is.
I mean, I feel like you guys covered it well, but I've always been lower on the false nine with the players that we have than you guys because I just don't know if it necessarily works out in practice the way it might sound because if someone's dropping off like that, you really need your wingers to play a different type of role, occupying the defensive line. And maybe it could work if we stick Rodrigo out there, but you can't just rely on it to come together. I think some serious coaching work is required. Like you don't necessarily just throw it out there and see what happens. And Ancelotti's always been more of a freer hand. And I just don't know how he feels about Rodrigo here. Like if you were to do it and put Asensio out there on the right, like I don't know, like it's a very weird fit to me. Maybe there's something there, but I just feel it's all a lot more simpler with Jovic there. And I mean, a fundamental problem with Benzema like not being there would be the generation of quality shot opportunities. And yeah, Isco and Hazard might be good finishers, but I doubt they're going to be able to get into the kind of locations that Jovic can. This is not to say that there's no risk with starting him, but I think there's risk with all of these options. And the more logical bet for the context that we have, for the coach that we have, and for the players that are on the table is Jovic. Although I will say I agree with you about Isco. I don't quite understand why he hasn't been as involved, and he probably deserves more minutes, but I can easily see that coming in midfield. It doesn't necessarily have to be, shoving him in there up top. So yeah, I mean, I'd lean on Jovic, but it's not like it's a guaranteed thing. It's still a pretty big drop off from what Benzema provides.
I'll be really honest. I forgot about two options. I forgot about Asensio completely. Like I think in a lot of ways, and he should be back by that Athletic game. I think in a lot of ways he's kind of tailor-made as a makeshift false nine. He's played that role before in the past multiple times. He basically was the backup striker under Zidane in 16-17. He's a good shooter. He's a good off-ball mover. He's probably the most reliable goal scorer out of the short list we have. And the other one, the other one is Gareth Bale. I mean, if we're being honest, he played as a striker basically. Who is
Gareth Bale? Who's this?
He's this dude with the ponytail, and he used to be really good at football, and he's going to retire soon. But at Tottenham last year, he had a handful of games where he was just playing as a striker, and he can play that role. Why not? If he can actually maybe give you the best of both worlds because he gives you the target that Jovic can provide. Plus, he's good in the build-up play. Plus, he can shoot from distance. But this is just the player profile I'm talking about, not what exists of him now. And I don't know. It's been a long time since he's played football.
I think that we're debating this at all really shows like the position that Jovic is in and like where he's at in his Real Madrid career. Not necessarily to like bag on him, but just if things
You're
like
destroying Matt's mental health right now.
No, I'm just saying if things were to have
spiraling.
To have worked out the way he wanted them to, like there would be no segment on this podcast that would be like, if Benzema's out, do we choose someone over the second number 9 that we have? Like, if it is Jovic and we do get this period, he's got to take his chance. It's like his last chance because we shouldn't be having this debate like at all. And I don't know, he's got to make it work somehow. Otherwise, like this is it. Like, I don't see how it works out.
I agree with that. And I think, honestly, his last opportunity, like I keep bringing those games up, Real Sociedad, Inter Milan, like he played well. Everyone who looks back on those games, he played really well. And against Inter Milan, where he had Skriniar all over him the whole game, and he just used his body so well and was able to switch the field of play. Like, my thing, like, why I've been a supporter of him is just because he's gotten bagged so much by the fan base and that people just like totally discredit his quality. And that's why I've like jokingly have become such a big supporter of him, because everybody just totally disregards any talent or quality that he has. Like, he's at Real Madrid for a reason, and he's not a terrible player. And so that's why I've kind of gone on this shtick and kind of like been a supporter of his, just because like he does have it within him. And so I think if he does get this chance, my one big thing is like he needs real continuity, and you just need to go with him. Like, even if he has the next game, he plays 90 minutes and he plays bad, like give him, if Benzema's out for 3 games, give him all 3 games. And then if he doesn't cut it, he doesn't cut it. But like, you actually have to give him a real shot and give him the confidence.
Are we not going to bring up that play where he like splits 2 defenders and he's getting pressure in the corner flag? And
at the corner flag?
Yeah. That was great composure. Well, let me ask you guys this.
That was 4 of his 7 touches in the game.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Like, so when you said that he didn't manscape at the beginning of the podcast, what is it that, like, what was it about his performance that you didn't like? Was it the fact that he only had 7 touches? Was there something else that he was doing wrong? What was it?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned it earlier. I just felt like he was more disconnected than he even is usually. Like, Ancelotti's talked about the Inter Milan game, after the Inter Milan game, and said, like, look, Jovic isn't going to be we're not going to play through Jovic like we play through Benzema. But he is he is a guy that can be in the box and score goals and stuff like that. And so I just felt like he was, for the 30 minutes out there, he was way too disconnected. Like, even on the runs, some of the runs he made, he usually has like so much more intent and purpose behind those runs. And like, he is looking for a goal scoring opportunity, or he is getting into a good spot. And it just wasn't there today. And I just felt like I don't know what it was. It looked like he wasn't fully engaged. He kind of does have like almost like a laissez-faire attitude when he's out there, which I think rubs some people the wrong way. But I don't know. I just felt like he wasn't fully engaged today.
I want to do a kind of a 180 twist on the topic. So was there anything else that we wanted to discuss with regards to Jovic and strikers and stuff?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. One player who I don't even think his name has been mentioned on the podcast yet was Ferland Mendy, who I think is somehow getting better every game. And is it kind of weird to say I just basically trust him now when he's being pressed? That's not something I expected to say early this season. Definitely not last season. Defensively, now, I think there is something we can say about him defensively in a non-positive light in the second half when we talk about the second goal. But I think one thing he's been doing better of late, since the Cadiz game especially, was that he's providing better overloads and just being there in a position for Vinicius to kind of play off of someone, which he wasn't before. And I think and I'm not saying that he's been necessarily lights out with the ball in that position. I think he can have his touches in the box still need to improve a lot. But I think like at least he's been a reliable dribbler, if nothing else. Just doing flicks out of pressure now, like megging players, he's dribbling past players, and like overlaps have been pretty good. There was, I don't know if I found this funny or just amused, but it was like, this is just weird. There was one point in the first half, it was 6 minutes, where he's getting pressed and he does that thing where last season we were like mortified of, where he crosses it across our defensive line with his right foot.
Yeah.
And he pulled it off and the Bernabeu started clapping. It's just an applause all across the stadium for that. So just he's been really good. 102 touches today, most of anyone on the field. A lot went through him. I just felt like he was omnipresent everywhere. A very good performance from him. Okay, we can leave it there. We can leave it.
Well, I mean, I thought Matt was going to jump in with something. I think some days like he plays off Vinicius a lot better and some days it's just not there. I think I mentioned that on one of the earlier podcasts. Hopefully that's a sign that something is building there rather than randomness, because maybe you can point out many games back it was just consistently not there. And the fact that like we're seeing something here is maybe it's never going to turn into a Benzema Vinicius level chemistry, but something that's a lot more functional and stable and leads to better outcomes for both. I thought Mendy was good today. I also think he's just like in peak confidence right now. Like he had a moment in the box where we were being pressed and his mind 100% went back to the roulette he did, and he just took on like 5 defenders in the box. And it didn't really quite have the same result, and I think he was a little lucky to come out of it there, but he's just feeling himself right now. And everything he's trying is basically coming off. And yeah, I mean, he's had it. Go ahead.
He also has at least just one moment within each game where he just completely bodies somebody on the other team, and it was early in this game. I think it was against Tete Morente, where he just like stiff arm, just barely puts his arm out, stiff arm, and then Tete Morente goes flying to the ground. Like I feel like that's been a consistent theme now for the last few games. He just has one of those for games where he's just a brick wall.
It doesn't even feel like he's challenging humans. It just feels like he's just brushing like an insect off his shoulder, like in all of those challenges. It's insane. Well, I know this is crazy jumping around there, but I did think he could have done better on the second goal we conceded, and it starts with an Alaba gamble. I think that should have been avoided. But Mendy kind of a rare slip where he just gets the passing lane wrong, and he's a little bit too narrow in that situation, and he leaves Pere Mia free in our box. Did you guys feel like, is there anything we could have done better defensively in this situation? Like to me, it was the Alba gamble plus Militao hedged off his marker a little bit too much. I mean Mendy, sorry.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you guys. I think honestly, after watching the goals back, and Ancelotti said after the game that the goals were avoidable, and it's pretty crazy that Elche had 2 shots and scored 2 goals. But on the second goal, since we're talking about that one first, tell me if you guys disagree, but I think Militao should have just held his position. Like in that type of situation, when you're
the first goal, you mean?
On the second goal.
Oh,
he stepped out. So after Alaba and Casemiro got beat by Lucas Boye with that one cut and turn, Militao stepped out of position to close down Boye. And I think Militao should have just held his position. Lucas should have tucked in a little bit more. And then that 3 of Mendy, Militao, and Lucas could have bought themselves just a little bit more time, a few more seconds, and make Boye make a decision. But at least you keep him in front of you. And I just felt like Militao was maybe a little too aggressive to step out there once Alaba had already been beaten and there was no Casemiro there. So if he steps out, then there's a huge gap. And so I felt like if he just held, you could see, if you watch the video back, you could see if he just held and the 3 that Lucas tucks in a little bit, they almost form a 3 centrally that would probably be enough to hold Elche off for that sequence.
Yeah, and this is the thing with Militao and growing as a center back who provides a lot of value with these types of aggressive actions, stepping out. And I still think Mendy could have done better there, but I do think Militao stepping out in the way that Matt's talking about just makes Mendy like nudge inside and like just turn himself a little bit, because he gets beat and Mendy's like, well, maybe I have to deal with the dribble now, and then bang, the pass is gone. And I mean, I still think he should have read that situation better, especially given his standards. And he just was a little off there. But Militao, like the more and more I look at this play, there was not much he was achieving by stepping out there. There are moments when you do that, when you time it correctly, you can come out with the ball, and it's just so valuable. It just wasn't the right read there, because what happens if he doesn't step out, right? And the player gets to drive. There's no real dangerous passing options that appear if Militao stays where he is. What opens up is the long shot. and you're still giving something up. But at that point, once there's a defensive breakdown with Alaba stepping out, you have to give up something. That's what defensive breakdowns do. And what you want to give up is the long range shot. Like there was a way for Militao to kind of just, hold his position, kind of stunt at the attacker, just try to bait him forward. And then when he gets closer to the edge of the box, that's the moment for him to step out. And then the pass becomes more difficult. Mendy's in a position where he can probably cut out the passing lane. And it's just a better way of dealing with it on the fly. This is something I just expect to see from Militao. This is bred into me from watching Ramos over most of his career, growing into the center back that he is. These reads in the aggregate are so difficult, and most center backs don't do them. Most center backs are not this aggressive because they're just exposing their team all the time. It comes with a sizable amount of risk, and I think that the thing about it is it has to be an instinct within the center back. It really is not a decision as much as it is reflexive, in that you see the moment and you just go for it because it's aggression, right? It's almost like a pressing action. You just have to be attuned to it and you have to go for it. And that's what gives it this kind of feel of being a gamble, because it's not very calculated as much as it's just instinct that gets refined over time. And because it's something that really only gets better with experience, to the point where you feel like you're not seeing any mistakes, like we saw with the final years of Ramos, these will happen now and then. And which is not to say, oh man, let's just not talk about it. There's a give and take here, and I'm pointing out that this is part of the negatives you'll see with Militao's style of defense, right? It'll give you a lot, it'll be good in a lot of instances, and then in a moment like this where we really need him to be a bit more passive, his instincts for the defender he is just takes over in the wrong moment. He just goes for it, and I mean. It's part of the reason he's not one of the best center backs in the world yet. We'll get there, but right now he's just a very good one who still has a good ceiling.
So while we're talking about it, I think we can talk about the first goal too. And I also think there's a lot Militao could have done differently. Unfortunately, the camera cuts out when the play first starts, so you can't really see how the team's set up and where the marks initially were. But when you actually see the goal in live time, it looks like Alaba may have lost Lucas Boye, but that's not the case. Alaba is actually marking, I'm not sure who it was, but he had a different Elche striker that he was marking, probably Lucas Perez. And Militao should have at least checked his right. He never once checked his right shoulder to see where Lucas Boye is. And as a defender, you constantly have to be aware of where your man is and where the ball is. And he instead is defending the near post. The ball gets lofted over him. He's got no idea where Lucas Boye is, and he's got a free header. And Alaba scrambling to try and cover the most dangerous man, so he leaves Lucas Perez to try and get to Boye, but it wasn't his responsibility. And so, again, I think Eder Militao could have done better in that scenario.
I think he's going through a bit of a poor stretch, right? He was so fantastic to start the season. The last few games, he's made mistakes, and this is just how it's going to be, I think, with the young center back, right? It's not going to be beautiful, and this is why it's not that's it. We don't miss peak Sergio Ramos or Varane at all. Yeah. No, we do miss him.
And I think, honestly, I was telling Keon and the other, I guess it was last week or the week before, because there was a similar scenario which happened with Militao, and I said, this is happening pretty often, and if you switch off like that, you will be punished in big games and Champions League knockout games. And my one forewarning is we have to be careful with Militao in these Champions League games, because if you switch off in moments like that, the smallest details get punished. And so he's got to be on high alert in those types of games.
The problem is we can't bench him, right? There's no competition.
Oh yeah, no way.
I'm not starting Nacho, right? And I think someone just needs to have a word with him. The video analyst or whoever. I mean, players are pretty receptive to constructive criticism. They're more coachable than you think they are. Just have a word with him, point out the breakdowns, and be you were doing great across this stretch. it's time to switch back on and find that, because without you playing at that level, this defense isn't going to survive. Yeah. And I mean, we'll see how it develops. I've been trying to tell people there's going to be ups and downs with him. Like, we always like to get so high when we see young players doing really well, and then we like to get so low, which I'm not saying we're doing here. I think this is actually pretty like reasoned analysis. The other thing on the goal, which I think is kind of being missed, and I want you guys to tell me how fair this is, because looking at this replay doesn't quite capture the full play, but like, everyone's focusing on obviously that ultimate breakdown. But who is it? Number 22 receives, Mojica receives for Elche on that far side. He's the left back for them, and he just has like, he's completely free to pass the ball, and that gets Lucas Vázquez to step up. And that's what opens up the channel. Casemiro is like not quick enough. He's kind of late to recover. But in that moment, like, that's even Hazard should be busting his ass to get over there to cover that option. And he's just not anywhere close to it. And it's such an easy pass because it attracts Lucas forward. Maybe Lucas also should be like, hold his position and just realize there's no real point for me to try to step up there, right? Like, I don't have access. Like, just let him have the ball and let him try to drive forward and see what happens. But this has kind of always been a problem with Lucas's defending as a fullback. He has more winger instincts in those scenarios. Like, honestly, it was just a bunch of bad reads and recognition from beginning to end on that play, which is why I find the way this game went so frustrating, despite the fact that we created 300 million chances or whatever. But I kind of think it starts with really lackadaisical, structure and attitude from Real Madrid to shift over to that far side. Hazard not getting across, Lucas making the wrong read, Casemiro not being able to react in time, and then Militao not checking over his shoulder, and then Alaba realizing a little too late that he needs to come over. Although I think probably criticism on Alaba there is the harshest, because I just don't think he expected Militao to do that. But the more and more you look at the sequence, it just looks worse and worse.
I think it's a combination of so many things. Like, for the play that you brought up with the Vázquez stepping up and leaving all that space behind him, the winger tendencies will continue to be true with him no matter how many times he plays as right back, it seems, although he's getting better at it. But I think it's also a combination of the way they were habitualized in this game in that moment was that, like, Elche are doing nothing, and I'm sure Casemiro will just come over and cover for me if anything goes wrong. It's a weird, I think, bad habit they probably fell into the way this game was unfolding. And also the fact that we mentioned earlier, Hazard's not someone who's going to be covering for Vázquez defensively. And the Militao thing is just weird because he's, to me, foot perfect like almost the entire game except for one mistake. Every game, it seems. And the one mistake always seems to cost us. And I don't know if that's just unfortunate for him. It's just like devastating how like the one or two mistakes he makes really cost us. In this game, again, it's the same thing as almost every other game. His step-up interventions were fantastic. Hey, he even scored the equalizing goal, by the way. And after the game, Ancelotti was comparing him to Sergio Ramos as like the makeshift striker.
Exactly. This was such a young Ramos performance, beginning to end. Anyway, continue.
Well, yeah, just that it's like he's so good for the entirety of the game, apart from the mistake that we end up dissecting, and it's just weird. And so I agree. Like, hopefully, it's just a matter of you look at the film, you look at like on the first goal, especially on the second goal. I get what you guys are saying. I think on the fly, he just assumed that Mendy was taking the outside run, so he's like, okay, I'll just step up on this guy. But you're right. I think if he had just stayed back, what's the worst that could have happened? Like maybe a long distance shot, but the angle wasn't great for shooting anyway, and you would have covered your bases. I also think Mendy too was again way too narrow. But on the first goal, I thought it was pretty much down to him because there's no reason for him to just be hedged off as Boya that much. He's going to the near post when there's no one else going to the near post that he needs to mark. Alaba has literally two defenders he's trying to mark, and because he has his man and then Boye, which is impossible for him to track at that stage when Militao's left him. So Militao has to be aware in that situation that he has Boye behind him. So it's just weird, yeah, because I do think he's been pretty good apart from his one or two mistakes, but the one or two mistakes have been disastrous. So you just hope that he can get that out of his system.